Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you.
All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. We are so excited to have with us a couple that we've known for a while. And again, we're going to call them by another name. We have with us Todd and Marie this morning. Heather, why don't you give a short introduction for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. So we have invited Todd and Marie to join us because they serve on a global leadership team and have been in the fundraising world for several years. I know that Marie has 25 years of experience in fundraising and Todd has 17. And then 12 of that is combined as they went to the field as singles and then got married. And so they bring a wealth of experience, both from their own journey as a support-based worker or workers, but they also work in a role that enables them to steward others that find themselves in support-based ministry. And so from both areas of experience, we just really feel like they have a lot to bring to this recap conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other reasons we asked them to join us for this episode specifically is because of their experience with member care and just that angle of managing anxiety in other people, which is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but I think Steve did a good job of explaining that. And all of that entails with interacting with a team, which is hard enough for people to just get along, but also cross-culturally on top of that, like the layers and layers. So glad to have you guys with us.
Glad to be here.
Good to be here, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess before we get started in our episode, we'd love to just hear a little bit more about you guys, whatever you'd like to share.
Random fact. Started bouldering at an older age and taking risks. So I never thought that I would do that.
That is a random fact, and I love it.
Yeah. What spurred you to do that?
Our child.
Yes. Okay. That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Yeah.
Been doing it since a little one, and now it's as a family. So
Nice.
It's fun.
So fun.
I thought I would, be okay with it and like it, but turned out to really like it.
Oh.
And there are different pieces of it, like just getting to know other people, just personal growth. You can all do things at the same time, even if you're at different levels. And it's really fun.
Spurring each other on, building relationships as you drip sweat.
Yeah.
You think you can't do something,
Yeah.
and then you
You
get
do
pushed,
it.
pushed
Yeah.
on. And you actually, there's some times where people get stuck on a route, but you're all trying it together, and then somebody gets it, and then everybody else keeps getting it.
Nice.
And so it's just kind of something great.
A breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with bouldering, you're still harnessed in.
No
You're
harness.
Not harnessed
So
in.
it's all like
You're just going up the wall and just step by step.
lateral stuff.
Sometimes
Yeah.
lateral, sometimes you got to jump a little and just
Sometimes.
reach on up.
Okay,
Inverted.
so in the country where you live in Asia, is that an experience that you have like out in nature, or is it primarily in a gym setting?
Primarily in a gym.
Okay,
We did do one outdoor route
cool.
Without mats.
without mats.
Without mats, but
Yeah.
that
With
we were
ropes.
harnessed.
Oh, okay.
We were harnessed on that
Okay,
one.
Gotcha.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
heart just skipped a beat. I was like,
And helmets. There's
Okay,
lots
yeah.
of protection and equipment.
yeah, very cool.
Controlled
I love that.
risk.
Yeah, controlled risk. I like that. Cool.
Mm.
So maybe before we dive into what stood out to us from the episode, I'd love to just hear, from your experience in support-based work, leaning on the Father to provide, have you had seasons where you experienced anxiety? And how did you see the Lord meet you there?
In fundraising specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This past fall, we had a big deficit and we were just like, oh my word, how in the world? And I was beginning to like what is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that we're going to send out an email and just tell our need. Like we've never been in this situation and let's just be open.
And was this your first significant deficit
First significant deficit.
after
First
20
deficit.
plus years
20 plus years.
of fundraising? Wow. That's not normal, listener.
Yeah. So it was like welling up inside of me of like, oh no, like we're not going to be able to afford this, and this, and it's going to make all these changes. So I was that angst.
I think it was just an opportunity of just working with our home office. They were really great to help us and had a crucial conversation to be able to really articulate the needs in a clear, concrete way. And then also just reaching out to some specific people who in the past have been helpful in the past, combined with just some general, maybe general blasts, so to speak, to our partners. And it's the whole time just giving it to the Lord and just praying, just trusting that He will provide. He will. We constantly tell people, it's usually not in fundraising, but just with just work and things. God will give us exactly what we need to do exactly what He wants us to do. And so it may not look like what we want, but it is exactly what He will want. And so,
how long did it take you to learn that lesson?
I'm probably still learning that lesson,
right?
But it's been over the last few years, and that's kind of stood out a lot, and just given me a lot more confidence and freedom. And it's not fatalistic, which is kind of nice. I can still lean in. I can still write those emails. I can still reach out. And so I did reach out to somebody, and it was just neat to see how God provided, because the reply, was funny that you should bring this request to us, because our accountant just said that we need to spend about $20,000.
It's a tough problem to have.
Because they were overseeing a foundation that really helps.
So this was a church or a foundation? Foundation. Okay.
And so, so within a week's time, we were able to have a quick turnaround and a large deposit in our account.
That's awesome.
And there was no need to be anxious, because God provided exceedingly abundantly more than we could have ever imagined.
Yeah. And I think that's not always the way God provides.
Right.
His provision is always timely. It is what we need. Even if, Todd, like you said, it's not what we want or think, it is what we need. And man, I think that's such an excellent story for us to all take to heart, not necessarily to get caught into a trap of comparing or even wondering, like, why, God, haven't you done that, or didn't you do that? But more just to know, man, God knows what He's up to, and He does what He pleases, and it is for our good, and it is timely.
And that's the question that's the thing to ponder, not how do I get in touch with a foundation?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Good word.
Yeah. Although there's no harm in getting in touch with foundations.
So we'll follow up with that later.
That's right. Maybe another episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, man, what an excellent segue into our conversation about anxiety. I would love to know from you guys what stood out in this episode.
I think the first thing that stood out to me is when we reflect. I don't know if it's an order of importance or anything, but the first thing was that email thread exchange that he had.
Yeah.
The one where he was accidentally looped in on?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The conversation between the wife and the husband, and they were trying to decide what money to give.
That
or how to use. I think whether they were going to serve. Yeah.
Yes.
And they were very real.
Yeah.
Yes.
To experience somebody's brutal honesty, unfiltered. Yeah.
Yes.
I appreciated the way that he approached it and wanted to kind of make the best of that. I think I would use the word of how do you steward these relationships? And even just thinking, I've been reflecting about or reading some things, and it just talks about limits. And so we are limited people. We're not perfect, and nor the people that we work with. And that's not any disrespect, but it's just matter of fact.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't be surprised if there's, if we get disclosed with this email thread of this other conversation, or, fill in the blank. And so that's maybe the first thing of, okay, this is okay. This is somewhat normal. And maybe there is an offense there too, but at the same time, I also say that there's an opportunity there to show that there is a relationship opportunity, because it's not all about the money. It's not about the money for my ministry, but rather it could be something of, okay, well, how can I come alongside them? They obviously have some values and some things that God's put in front of them. And what a way to unite partners by being for them. And I have an example of some friends. They emailed us and they said, I'm sorry, we are not going to support you. I don't know if Marie knows this story, but we're not going to be able to financially support you. Our heart and focus needs to be here. And they said, we'll continue to pray for you. And what a lovely conversation that we were able to have. and a way to say, wow, like now I can pray for them and for that focus that's on their heart.
Mm-hmm.
With no guilt, no shame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and that was another reflection. Like that's an opportunity to even vindicate others from feeling that shame, because they feel just as bad sometimes as I might for something.
Right.
And so I can say, be an opportunity of blessing.
Yeah.
To say, I'm so glad that God has put that on your heart. And that's okay, because we trust that God will give exactly what he needs,
Mm-hmm.
do exactly what he wants me to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, and that story reminds me of another example he gave of, I guess, when he was trying to unpack what it looks like for anxiety to be contagious. And I had asked him, like, hey, in going into a partnership meeting, can you help me understand how that anxiety could be contagious, how that would affect the meeting? And he just responded saying, well, sometimes when somebody is anxious, the person they're speaking with picks up on that and then behaves differently as a result. To your story and in just those people bringing forward that they would have to pivot to something else, I think that the conversation you were able to have with them was powerful, and kind of the takeaway was powerful because it seemed like there was freedom on both sides to receive what they needed to do, and nobody was managing anybody else's anxiety. You were both just showing up, receiving from the Spirit, going forward.
Right.
And it's also such a good reminder that it's not about us, and it's not about what we're doing. It's about what God's doing. And how do we invite others in on that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was reading an email today from a list that I'm subscribed to, and one of the points that really stuck out to me was super simple, but just encouraging people to give through you and not to.
That's good.
Wow. Those prepositions are significant.
Words matter.
Yeah.
I'll throw another one out there. Was the giant? Is it the giants
on the shoulders?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I liked the examples. I liked how he had it rooted in, just real examples of maybe a father or grandfather's capacity, and just this idea of comparison. And one thing that stuck out to me was even just thinking generationally and even beyond comparison. It's not like, oh, don't compare, so let's just don't think about them. But maybe where there's, again, opportunity to say, what was it that was in their background that helped them to have that capacity? I was talking to Marie this morning, and I said, do you realize that we grew up without cell phones? We grew up without text messaging. And so when you called somebody's house, you didn't know who was going to pick up the phone. That was a little bit,
cold
anxiety inducing. Every call is a cold call.
Which explains why this generation has a harder time, I think, making even phone calls.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then it's, and you don't have to be settled with, well, this generation this and this generation that, but you can say, okay, well, now I understand why this is a little bit more difficult compared to my father or my grandfather.
Right. Yeah.
But now what can I do to build and to grow in that? And I think even he talks about learning. So those are some initial thoughts I had on that.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of overlook the context that person was raised in and grew up in, the things, the challenges they had to overcome. And even I think there's a tendency, as I think about parenting, this is a little bit off topic, but for a kid to compare their current progress with an adult's, that's not fair. You're comparing your beginning or your middle to my end. Yeah. And you can't expect to have the same amount of progress and maturity. And
well, that's even in support raising too, right? I want to be just like them. They've been doing it for years and they have this huge base of supporters. And then you compare yourself and then you end up sometimes paralyzing yourself because, I want to do it the way they do it. And, comparison kills.
Poisonous. Yeah.
It's the thief of joy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, an opportunity to build and to steal with zeal. I don't know. What you say? Rob and duplicate? No, not necessarily. But
yeah, I think when you're free to learn from others and you don't feel like you have to be like them or that your story needs to play out the same way or that God needs to provide in the same way, when you're free to learn, world of difference.
You walk in freedom and less anxiety.
Yes.
Right? Less anxiety for sure.
I thought it was fascinating that there were so many nuanced types of anxiety. It makes sense as he was listing them. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that does produce in you a very different kind of anxiety than this would. But But interesting that the only contagious was the chronic, which actually isn't even based in reality, or, it's not based in something concrete. It's based in assumption or in false needs, things like that.
Yeah, just getting down to the point. Like I think he was using the perfectionist as an example of that, like forcing them to send an email with mistakes.
Yeah.
Wow, if you're a perfectionist listening to that, you're probably, you're starting to sweat a little bit.
Well, as I was editing that part, I thought, I still don't know if I could do that. Could I edit this and leave in mistakes? I don't know.
Right?
Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah. So I think we have to ask ourselves as fundraisers or as a future fundraiser, like, what is my anxiety telling me will happen when I fundraise? And then just sit down and let's sit with that for a little bit and express it.
Externalize.
Yeah,
I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
I wrote here, on my notes, after thinking about that section of it ultimately is, what am I depending on? Am I depending on what I'm doing and what I can do and what I can accomplish and how much money I can raise? And am I writing the best newsletter, or am I depending on God? And because when I'm depending on myself, I'm anxious and I'm in a tither and I want to control it all. And then it just spirals. And then my supporters can feel that. Like that false, who am I? I get nervous and I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I say? What do I do? And that's not me at all. I'm like, here I am. So it just, I just found that really interesting. It's like, okay, am I looking to be righteous or self-righteous? Yeah. I want to be righteous and holy, right? Because he is. And reflect that even in support raising and not.
Yeah. Then when you start to spiral, maybe it's easy to start to think, well, I'm not worthy of support.
Sure.
Which that's not really the question. The question is the work worthy of?
Exactly. Is he worthy, right? Like that song I love by Andrew Peterson. Is he worthy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he is.
Yeah.
But I need to remind myself of that in these seasons of looking through that.
Right. It's not something that you just lock in once and you've always got it. You have to keep on coming back to that.
How many times in the Word does he tell us to remember? Remember his faithfulness in all these things.
I think that idea of remembering the why, or the remembering the why are we doing this? Why are we raising this support? Not only finances, but in that partnership, the encouragement, the prayer, all of those things. I know that was alluded to in that podcast, and I think it's helpful for us to take pause and to remember that. So, and that will kind of reduce the anxiety a little bit, because one, it goes from defense to an offensive posture, where it's not, how do I react and respond to this anxiety? But the anxiety it won't not always disappear fully, but at least there's another touch point, another facet that emphasizes, I'm just simply excited about what God's doing. And, maybe partially that old hymn of the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. So dim, not completely gone, but the total audience is the Lord.
Good. I loved the way he said, you have to wrangle. That was a wonderful verb.
It was.
Wrangle your inner critic and just bring it into line with the gospel. You're just going to rope it. You're going to tie it down, bring it into submission to the gospel. That was really good.
I also loved how he talked about stacking a team of experts to know more about it than you do. Inviting other people in on the journey and not always having to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
He talked about, interns and different things and just how we can delegate. So some of the things we do, even with folks, is knowing that we don't have all the answers and we can't do it all. So we have people set up events for us, and it decreases the anxiety, or they'll send out invites, find a location. We don't have to do all those things. And just use other people's gift of hospitality and share the wealth.
And that probably really blesses them to have something tangible they can do for your success.
For sure.
Yeah. And I would say a practical point to that would be just to respect and honor them by doing a little bit of extra work, like preparing an address list of of an initial group that you want to invite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or, having some of the details in mind, a clear enough vision to help be a blessing to them in that.
Just like you would delegate to a staff member, like you'd want to give them some direction and some good.
Andy and I talk quite a bit about the importance of having a core team of people around you, a committed group of people that have said, hey, when these kinds of things come up, please ask us, or here's our skills. We want to be used in this ministry that he's doing. So that's really important. Something else that I think was just really evident from our conversation with Steve is that there's not something wrong with you if you experience anxiety. We're all going to experience anxiety. And I think that we have a lot of tools in the Word that help us, put off anxiety or move through anxiety, but it isn't something to feel ashamed of, but it is an invitation, I think, to see like, hey, where am I making some assumptions, or where am I trying to take control where it's not mine to have? Or where am I not entrusting myself to the Lord? Like there's a lot of invitation. And I think there's a lot of reflection and externalizing with others that can happen to really help you see how to move through it. But I think it's very normal to experience it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I was reading somewhere recently, and they talked about just the benefits of anxiety, which we don't often really think about that. And one of them, I think that the benefit of anxiety that they mentioned was that it actually helps us to move past some of the illusion that we do have it all together.
Right.
And so then rightfully responded to, anxiety is a gift to help us to more quickly go to God and to put our trust in the Lord. And so that was one of the benefits that they mentioned. And then they also said that because it's normal, I mean, I have 3 books actually right in my lap on anxiety, and there's countless books and podcasts and resources about anxiety. I think it's pretty clear it's normal,
right?
And so the other benefit was that we can use that to be a blessing to others. It's one thing if somebody just says, hey, don't be anxious, which is really probably the worst thing you can say if someone's anxious.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah. And so, but it's like, I really understand what you're going through. And that extends the same compassion and the mercy that God has, where he comes to us. And so it really is an act of living out the gospel, living out the character of God. And that's the benefit of anxiety.
I think you're right. And it can feel really uncomfortable to sit in anxiety or to kind of recognize and be mindful that that's what you're feeling. I think that there are a lot of ways that we can cope with what is anxiety in us, but to try to minimize it in a way that just removes the discomfort of it, right? I think that's why we have a lot of addictions or escapism, to media or social media or entertainment or whatever. But I think that if you're willing to kind of sit in the discomfort of anxiety, like you said, I think it can teach us so much and really give us the grace of remembering that we are finite, that we have limits, like you said, that we need an all-powerful, sovereign, good God as our bedrock and not our own efforts. So, I think that's really important.
To recognize our limitedness.
Yes.
Because he's unlimited. I love that. Somebody once said, hang your weakness on his strength. And it's the same thing for this type of work, our anxiety. It's like, you hang our weakness, but on his strength, because he's all powerful and he's the one who can provide all of our things. He has the answers to our anxieties, answers to our financial struggles or whatever that may be. And so trust him with our weakness. It's okay to be weak. I don't want to admit I'm weak, but when I admit that, I'm not as anxious. And then it gives me freedom to walk in who he is. And I love that. It's okay to be limited.
And I was looking in Deuteronomy. Do you ever think you could find a passage on anxiety in Deuteronomy? I don't know, but it's saying, if you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt. All these things, it's basically saying, when you're in an anxious position, feeling outnumbered, feeling outgunned, feeling under under-equipped,
Mm-hmm.
this is a prompt.
Mm.
Remember, God brought you out of Egypt.
What's the reference there?
This is in Deuteronomy 7, chapter 7, verse 17 and following.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
So that was just kind of, he didn't say like, don't worry about it. Don't be anxious. He said, let this be a prompt to come to me, to remind you of who I am.
It's so important because, I mean, I'm reminded of our conversation with Nelson Sipa about even Elijah, who is this pinnacle of, this biblical pillar, right? Who has these awesome interactions and stands up for the Lord and goes to battle. Even after that, he still is in moments of despair and depression, and he fails to remember. So it's very human for us to just live in that moment of anxiety and let that kind of consume everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked what Steve Cuss said about how just being aware that you're making an assumption or just being aware that you're having an anxious thought can be really helpful. Because if you're just kind of in your head and thinking all these things without realizing like, oh, I'm anxious or, oh, I'm making an assumption there, then it just kind of like that takes you into a story like very different than the reality that God might be playing out in front of you, right? But even just the awareness of like, you know what? This feels big. This feels heavy. This is what I'm thinking, but I'm making some assumptions, and just being able to name that, even if you're not able to correct it or something, just the fact of realizing it helps to bring you out of maybe that spiral. Then we're able to apply truth. We're able to remember. I think that's important. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I was really intrigued by this idea of the third space.
I was about to say that.
Were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just, I mean, it's not a new idea, but just to have the syntax around it, to have the vocabulary to be able to address it. Yeah, what do you guys think? And as a reminder, this is when you notice that your brain is actually in someone else's brain. You're wondering what they think. What does that mean? How is that going to play out? You're really trying to guess or control what somebody else is thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think maybe we've used the phrase of we're not the Holy Spirit for other people. We've also used the phrase be careful of a suicide, which has been something that we've seen around.
So unpack that a little bit.
It's like assumptions can close doors, right? Like we assume that like Andy, I assume that you think this way, or just because you said one thing. So that absolutely closes the door. I don't try to do that or try to build a relationship. When we assume we can end relationships, or it can paralyze us and stop us in our tracks. Oh, Heather, you're so awesome. I'm never going to talk to you because you're just this awesome person, right? Like I can't be your friend.
A little bit starstruck.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Or, you reach out to someone for a partnership meeting and they don't respond. And then you decide, you assume they don't want to meet with me.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so you don't try anymore. When then the reality is they have 4 kids.
Right.
And one of them is throwing up and they just didn't get your call.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a critical connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think it's filling in the gaps and taking the time and the care to respect the relationships to communicate. One of the things that we've noticed on the field in terms of anxiety in the realm of conflict was that people are mislabeling something as conflict. And so their third space would be, for example, we had somebody that said, "Oh, I don't really like conflict. I'm really afraid to ask this person about this." And it really was a point of information, like an information gap to clarify on something, and not conflict at all. But in that person's mind,
could have been conflict.
Yeah. So,
and they were anxious about it. They didn't want to address it, but actually refocusing them to what the truth was and the false assumption that was, and just go talk to them. It's a point of clarification. It's
Clarity
okay.
is kindness.
Yes.
One of the things that really stood out to me as he was talking about that third space was that, he mentioned that the fact is, most of us don't think about each other that much.
Yeah.
We're so worried about, I wore this outfit last Monday. People are going to realize that I wear the same clothes. Like nobody cares. People just don't think about us as much as we think.
Yeah,
I think that's true.
that's very true. Because we can put ourselves on a pedestal, like, without saying it. It's like that, what he talked about, like
Right.
almost that false pride almost. So.
We're the center of our story.
Yeah.
And so it's tempting. Yeah,
We're the
easy to do
heroes.
that.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a fault that we can get into, that we think we're
Mhm.
the heroes, but ultimately God's the hero.
Right. We're not the protagonists.
No.
Yeah.
Mm.
Or, I think some people are stuck in the story where they're the one that gets everything wrong.
Mm.
And
The
they're-
other way around. Yeah.
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 Well, even on that, I think I want to go back to Deuteronomy actually, because I thought it was really interesting. You're talking about self-righteousness, or like where do we, build our worth and our value, or how that anxiety impacts us. There's a point earlier in 7 where it was talking about. It says it was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set His love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. And it continues, but it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping His oath that He swore to your fathers. So, just this idea of being grounded in His love, because this is still in 7, which comes after 6, which is the great Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. And it's just so grounded in that first and greatest commandment. And that's not about us proving anything and being something for somebody, but it's about knowing that He loves us. And it said, it's not because of your number, or fill in the blank. What is it?
Performance.
If you're listening, like, what is it that you want to fill in the blank? Because I had a perfect meeting with somebody, or I made my deadline. It could be any of those things. No, God loves you right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to hear what you guys say based on your unique roles and experience. How have you seen anxiety be infectious or contagious?
I'm thinking of a team, right? One person was dealing with their anxiety with just falling into sin. And then it just kept spiraling and just getting bigger, like almost like a bigger and bigger snowball. And then that was impacting their team and their anxiety. And then they would lash out and things like that. And then the team started to have discord. And then they were actually having anxiety back to each other. And then I was recently chatting and saying, we need to remember the truth, that you're not the enemy. So that anxiety, they end up seeing each other as the enemy.
Yeah.
Because of that, instead of remembering the truth, He who began the good work in you is faithful to complete it. And they were trying to fix their anxious teammate instead of going to God with their anxious teammate. And then this is beautiful. They invited people into their anxiety finally. And then we're beginning to see this huge healing process. And that a team is being united rather than broken. And it just, you have to have a posture of a learner and a posture of humility. But at first, the infectious, it was almost gangrenous, right? Like the team was
contagion.
Yes. And now the beautiful contagion is they're pointing each other to Christ. And so it doesn't have to be a negative chronic thing. It can be a really good, God-honoring, glorifying thing. And I think that's a beautiful picture of the body.
Yeah.
And living overseas is tough and can be isolating, and you feel alone. But He wants us to invite others in, and He's always with us, right? He's Emmanuel. And how do we remember to do that in our anxiety? Because it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
It can be really embarrassing to be anxious.
I feel like that toughness is by design. We don't have that. We feel like we're so capable here in our home cultures. Pushed out of that.
Right.
It's hard, but it pushes you into community like nothing else.
And we can feel like we have to run on this performance pedestal, right? I'm overseas, I'm working, I shouldn't be anxious.
Right.
And so when we live out of that posture, we end up falling flat on our faces on that performance treadmill. But actually, that's a good place to be when we fall flat on our faces, because we're weak and we know that we need a savior. We need to be dependent on Him. And so
I was listening to somebody teach yesterday, and they were just talking about how, Paul had a thorn in his flesh. We don't know what it was. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was a besetting sin? I'm not
Mhm.
sure. But what we do know is that the Lord didn't remove it. And his
Mhm.
response was, my grace is sufficient for you. And so I think that, like you said, when we fall face first on that performance treadmill, that's the best place to be. And it really is, because it's in our weakness. It is in our weakness that we hang on his strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we see our need, that we functionally operate in our right dependence on him. Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Steve does workshops with people to bring them out of anxiety. I think he works in kind of a, not counseling, but maybe
Coaching.
Yeah. I
coaching
think,
space.
working with teams as well.
Yeah. But I think it happens in the context of community.
Mhm.
It doesn't sound like he does things at an individual, just one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with one-on-one work, but even one-on-one is two people,
Right.
community.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think that bringing other people in, externalizing to the Father and to community is so important.
And you need other people. I love this too, to challenge your assumptions.
Yes.
Mhm.
To listen to you and just kind of cold and calculating. Here's what I hear you saying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really
That's huge.
that's a gift that you can give somebody.
Well, and that is vulnerable.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
can see why
Yeah.
that feels scary, because
For sure.
maybe you've had people that have not done that kindly,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
but as people that follow Jesus, I think Todd said this earlier, our primary response is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that with a primary response of compassion, people can be vulnerable.
Mm.
It's safe to be vulnerable.
And sometimes it's also, I think, we also have to risk of it not working out.
Yeah.
Because I think we've had some trainings where we talk about the turning the other cheek in conflict. And I read somewhere they said, we don't turn the cheek just because it'll resolve the conflict. So if you follow all these 5 things or these 7 things and do this, anxiety will be gone. No, that's not the whole reason.
Right.
It's actually, we do these things because it proclaims the character of the God who I really am hoping to proclaim or be part of that proclamation on the field. And so it's that extension of who he is. And it's just simply fitting to put my trust in God when I'm anxious. It's simply fitting to invite others because he said, I am the vine, you are not the branch, but the branch is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, with that call to be the body, all those kind of things. And so that posture to follow how we've been created in him is probably what I would say is probably most helpful, because we can always look to the results. Why am I not, stopping to be anxious now? Why am I still anxious?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'm still anxious. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give up on this.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, if I turn and pivot to say, this is the best place to put hang my weakness on his strength.
Mm-hmm.
This is the best place here. Those would be some things that I would.
I love Philippians 4. You going to share that actually?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Maybe people are fresh out of school or, closer to different communities. And we all know Philippians 4:13. I can do all things.
Yep.
But do we know Philippians 4:14?
There's always a pause.
That's right.
Do I know?
Doesn't-
If you read it, I'll probably know
Right.
it.
It doesn't make the bookmarks or the t-shirts or the things like that. But it says, yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. And that whole laundry list of why Paul gets to 4:13, I can do all things, is actually it's actually the opposite of what we see it on all those mugs and t-shirts. It's just even though I can do all these things, I invited you in, or you kindly were there for me, and we worked together, and it was so kind of you to share in my trouble. And there's just something beautiful about that, and something that really rocks our individualism, and
American
also
wanting to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
and just resonates with who we are as God's people.
The beautiful picture of the body at work.
Man, Todd and Marie, thank you so much for your time. This has been a rich conversation. I'm just so encouraged by the stories that you've shared of how the Lord has provided for you. And even just, hearing about this team that you initially saw anxiety moving through, and then you saw the Spirit and the gospel moving through. And that's just a really good reminder that even if we find ourselves, if we feel stuck, the gospel always has hope for us. And so really encouraging. Andy, anything else before we wrap up?
I think just the encouragement to the listener, if this is one of your first time fundraising, or maybe you've been doing it for a while and you're in a season of stress, just to really challenge your own assumptions and really like take that, wrangle them into the gospel and just bring them into submission. And is this true?
Yeah.
Find a way to externalize them. If that needs to be just writing in your own journal or hopefully with a core team or some trusted friends.
Yeah.
And if you're on the field with your team or with a member care provider or something in that space, just externalize, invite people into that.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank
So
you,
good to
guys.
have you here.
Thanks.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.